This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. This is session number 34 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm your host, Gordon Brewer, and thank you for joining me in this four-part series called Love the Work and Hate the Job. Hopefully this information in these podcasts are helpful for you, especially for those of you out there that might be working for agencies and just really thinking about moving into private practice, or maybe even if you've already started into private practice and you're getting information about how to start a private practice and learning all the different things that you need to learn to get into private practice. So in today's session, I'm going to be talking about setting up an office and some of the things around finding an office and things to think about in terms of bootstrapping when you're first starting out, and also just maybe some out of the box or thinking outside of the box kinds of things that you might need for setting up a private practice. So we'll get to that here in a minute. One thing I did want to mention in this series, I do have the full course called Love the Work, Hate the Job. And you can find that by just going to practiceoftherapy.com/lovetheworkcourse. And there's also, for those listening to the podcast, you can get a discount by just going to practiceoftherapy.com/lovethework discount, and you'll get 20% off the course. As I mentioned before in some of the previous episodes, I've really priced it at trying to be very affordable for folks that are just starting out. With the discount, it comes out to around $20 for the course, the 4-part course that will be emailed to you, one email each day for 4 days. So that's how that course works. The other thing I wanted to mention to folks is that I'm working on getting a mastermind group together. For those of you that might not be familiar with what a mastermind group is, a mastermind group is just simply a group of peers, and usually it's a very small group. In other words, 4 to 6 people, 6 at the most, that get together twice a month through video conferencing, and we just talk about our practices and talk about what we're doing to grow and build a private practice. And so if you'd like to be part of a mastermind group, it is well worth the investment. I know for me, when I joined a mastermind group, my practice income has just skyrocketed since I've been talking with others and learning some other ideas about running a private practice. And it just provides a whole lot of support for people in their practices. So I invite you to go over to practiceoftherapy.com/mastermind, and you can find out more about the mastermind groups and what's involved in getting started with that. And there's an online application there. And where we'll start with the mastermind groups is that if you'll fill out the application, I'll get back in touch with you, and we'll set up a time just to chat by phone to make sure that this is going to be a good fit for you in your work, and if a mastermind group would make sense for you. So take a look at that, practiceoftherapy.com/mastermind. So let's go ahead and jump into some of the logistics and thinking about setting up an office. You know, when a person first begins to think about going into private practice, when as we discussed in the first part of this series, I think the place to really start is to think about your why. The why you want to do this to begin with. But the other thing that you have to think about is once you come to the decision, is really thinking about the logistics around running a private practice. Obviously, the most traditional way of thinking of doing mental health counseling or mental health therapy, marriage and family therapy, social work, any kinds of those talk therapies is that you want to have a place to meet with folks. And most of us tend to think of just having a traditional office with, nice furniture and a waiting area and all of that. Certainly what I have in my practice now, but it wasn't always that way when I first started out. Quick story is that when I first went into private practice, one of the things that I was trying to do is figure out a way to have an office space where it wasn't going to cost me a whole lot. And had a friend that had a medical practice. She was a nurse practitioner and had started this medical practice. And there was a doctor and several other nurse practitioners. And they were looking for someone that they could refer to for counseling and therapy services. And so I went, we had that conversation, and what I ended up doing was they had just kind of a back kind of storage area at their practice at the medical clinic, and they said, if you want to clean this out and maybe fix it up a little bit, you can use this as your private practice office. And so I jumped at the chance, and they didn't even charge me for the space. Turns out it was a crappy space to begin with. I mean, you'd have to go through one of the exam rooms to get to the space, and it just, the logistics of it very quickly just kind of fell apart. And I said, this isn't going to work for me. But I remember back at the time I had, I got cards made and all this kind of thing with that address there, and I had a Google Voice number and all of that. And it just did not work out. But, fortunately for me, when I started my private practice, I was still working for the agency at the time. And, long story short is that space didn't work out, but I did find another space at a church I was affiliated with, and they had some room in the church where I could meet with clients, and that turned out to be really kind of the real start to my private practice. But one of the things that you want to think about when you're looking for office space is think about the location, and obviously you want it to be accessible for people, and you want it to be able to people to be able to find it easily. Ideally when you have a practice, and again, this is what I've grown to, is at my office now, last year I was able to buy an office building, just by, partially luck, but also just some good, getting some good investment advice and stuff from financial people. But, the office I have now is a freestanding building, and it's on a corner of a very busy intersection. And so people seeing the building and the sign on the building has been a great advantage for us in terms of people calling us and getting in touch with us about services. So as you think about your space and moving into an office space, you want to maybe have that in the back of your mind. Is the location not only going to be a good location for your clients as far as ease of use and access and that sort of thing, but also just thinking about being able to, for other people to be able to see kind of your signage and that sort of thing as far as marketing goes. Now, there's probably, a mixture of opinions on that. Certainly, we want to keep what clients coming to see us confidential, and I guess a lot of it depends on what your clients want, and also just thinking about what your own ethical kind of mindset and frame of mind around things. Some people would maybe prefer to have an office where the entrance was very private and people didn't see a person coming in and out. Others might not feel quite so tied to that. And again, you just have to kind of look at your own kind of ethical compass on that. So I didn't mean to get off on that tangent, but again, those are things that you want to think about when thinking about an office space. The other thing about when you're getting started into private practice and you're thinking about an office space, it just makes sense at the beginning, especially when you're just getting started. your office space is going to be one of your biggest expenses. I know even for me, well, now that I'm a group practice, the other therapist in my group, in terms of overhead, what I pay them is the biggest expense, but probably next to that is just the office itself and the expense that it brings, the expense that it causes or that you have with that. When you're first starting out, when I think about bootstrapping, the term bootstrapping, if you're not familiar with it, it just means being able to do things on a really on a shoestring budget. That's where the term came from. But being able to think about ways of saving costs. It's probably not a good idea to invest unless you've got the cash and the reserves in place. You don't want to invest in an office space that you're not going to be able to pay for in the beginning stages. So in that sense, it's a good idea to maybe look at subleasing or maybe finding a space to share with another therapist or somebody else that's in business, kind of like I did at the beginning. I found another professional office. It was a medical clinic, and they had that other space that I could use that they were glad for me to use so they could refer to me. And again, that was a very, very low cost. I mean, what I mean by low cost, no cost for me in that. Of course, as I mentioned, it didn't really work out very well, but that doesn't mean that you can't find places like that. I know that I had another colleague that, again, he knew of a physician in town and was able to use their office in the evenings when they weren't regularly seeing patients. And so they had an area there in the office, was like a conference room or something like that, where he could meet with clients in the evenings. And that was a good way for him to get a start. The other thing to think about with that is being able to find other therapists that might want to go in business with you, or maybe just kind of share space. I call it kind of the co-op model of private practice, where a couple of therapists go in together, rent an office space, and then they just divide up the time and the expense of running the office together. And that's not a bad model to follow. Another one to really take into consideration, and in many ways it might work out better for some people, is to look at maybe joining a group practice or finding a group practice, private practice that's already established and already in business. And many times, a lot of group practices, I know I'm doing it this way currently, and that is I hire contracted counselors to work for the group. And so we do a fee split, and what the portion of the fee that I keep goes to pay for their rent and for their overhead and that sort of thing. And so it's just really kind of an easy thing for them. And the therapists that I have working with me very much appreciate that arrangement. And depending on the state you're in, I know there are some states that don't allow a fee split, and it just depends on the laws of your state and how that's set up. So again, that's another way to consider doing this, is to find a private practice group that's already established that might be looking for someone to hire you as an independent contractor. And that way you've got your own practice established, but you're just using their space and their name to see people under their name. So that's another way to think about this. Another way to think about seeing clients is to think about some of the non-traditional ways of seeing clients. Certainly one of the ways of meeting with people or working with clients is through telehealth or teletherapy. Again, that's a very, very much a growing segment or growing niche within the private practice world or within the therapy world. Even agencies are turning to that a lot, to where clients can hook up through their computer and do video conferencing to see clients. I've known of several therapists. In fact, one of the therapists that is with me, before she came to work with me, her whole practice consisted of doing nothing but online therapy and doing that. And she still does a portion of that, but she really kind of built a small little private practice around doing teletherapy. So there are a lot of ways to do that. There are even platforms that you can join. There's 7 Cups of Tea. I think that's the name of it. I might be wrong. But Talkspace and places like that. You want to look into it, though, to make sure that it's not going to cross ethical boundaries or legal boundaries within your state. So that's another way to think about doing therapy in just kind of a non-traditional way. Some other ways to think about providing services, and again, thinking of non-traditional or just kind of thinking outside the box, would be to do like in-home therapy, where the therapist goes to the client rather than the client coming to you. I know a lot of agencies operate that way. When I was working for an agency, that's what we did, is we provided intensive in-home therapy for children and their families. And so we would go into the home and actually have the sessions in the home. There's some drawbacks to that, just because you've got to deal with the distractions that might be going on in the home. And again, that was just part of the model that we operated under when I was in an agency. But I have known of some other therapists that have just set up just kind of some traditional kinds of therapeutic therapy practices, and they have gone to people's homes. And again, it is a lot's going to be determined by your comfort level with that, and certainly you've got to worry about safety concerns and that sort of thing. But it is absolutely doable. Another model that I really like, and again, depending on where you live and what the situation is, there's a guy in an earlier podcast that I did. I think it was back around the 4th or 5th episode. I interviewed Clay Cockrell, and Clay Cockrell is really an expert in helping people develop non-traditional kinds of therapies and or modes of providing therapy. He does a lot of telehealth and really teaches people how to set up that type of practice. But the other thing that Clay does, and that he really started his practice with, was he does something called walk and talk therapy. Now, he's located in New York City, and one of the things that a lot of his clients were complaining about or were thinking about was that it was just taking them such a long time to get to him. And if they had an appointment during the day, they would have to take a couple of hours off just to be able to make the commute and get to where he was. So what he did is he just started walk and talk therapy. And so he would just meet the client at their office, and then they would go into maybe like Central Park or around the city and just walk and talk. Of course, you probably in a large city, you're not too much concerned about people eavesdropping too much or breaking somebody's confidentiality, and certainly you want to have people sign off on that before you do something like that. But it is a successful mode or model of practice, and again, it's something that's just kind of thinking outside the box. So when you're thinking about going into private practice and you think about your office, I would say, as I like to tell my clients, give yourself permission to think outside the box. And so of really finding some non-traditional ways of providing services that will help you in those beginning stages to keep your costs down. The other thing that, excuse me, get a little bit of a swig of coffee here. So one of the things that the other things that we think about with setting up an office are certainly things like your phone system and faxes and email and that sort of thing. With your phone service, one practical way to do an office phone is just to get another cell phone. And I wish I had done that early on. That's not how I've done it now, but I wish I had just gotten a separate cell phone and gone ahead and paid for that to be my office phone. And what that does is that kind of helps you with the HIPAA compliance piece. If you have a separate phone number and it's through a regular cell service, those types of services, are the way I understand it, are really kind of grandfathered in terms of what HIPAA requires in terms of privacy and that sort of thing. If you go with something like a VIOP service, which is a voice internet operated kind of phone system, and those are things like I'm trying to think of the names of Ring Central. Another one is Spruce. Google Voice is a VIOP service. All of those services, you have to be careful about being able to get one that is going to be HIPAA compliant or HIPAA secure. Most of them are going to meet the standards, but what you don't get with a lot of them is that HIPAA does require that you get a BAA, a business associate agreement, and that's really the one caveat that a lot of them don't have available, but there are some that are out there. One that comes to mind is Spruce, and I'm not necessarily endorsing that one, but Spruce is one that I know will provide a BAA. I think there's I can't quite remember the names of the other ones, but if you go over to Person-Centered Tech, so shout out to my friend Roy Huggins, if you'll go over to Person-Centered Tech, he's got a list of those phone services that will sign a BAA that are really considered HIPAA secure. Most phone services are going to cost you around, if you think about getting a cell phone, if you got a basic cell phone with minimum number of minutes or whatever, probably $30-$40 a month on that. But the other, the voice, the VIOP services like Spruce are going to probably run that per line that you get. So that's a thing to think about with that. Another one that's a free service is Google Voice. Now, here's my caveat with that. If you're taking insurance or you're involved with insurance, you're going to really need to be HIPAA compliant. So I would say, and Google Voice won't sign the BAA with you. Their G Suite, which is their other services, Google Voice is not in those basic services with G Suite. So it doesn't. The BAA, the Business Associate Agreement, doesn't apply with Google Voice, but it does with the other things. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But anyway, Google Voice is a no cost alternative. Just be very careful about whether or not, if you're taking insurance or anything like that, you do want to have that BAA, and Google Voice might not be a best option for that. You could get a Google Voice as a personal number, but use your regular cell phone as your main number for your office. So the other thing, as I mentioned, that you're going to need when you set up your office is you're going to need email. And the one that I'll recommend, and I'm kind of biased here, it's the one that I use, is just Google G Suite. And Google has a business, a paid business a version of G Suite. If you get your Gmail, you get most of the tools of G Suite with a free Gmail account, and so you've got your name at gmail.com. But a better way to do that is to go ahead and pay the $5 a month per user and get the the business G Suite, which is just the basic G Suite version. And I'll put links in the show notes here so that you can get a link to go to that, and you can get 20% off your first year if you use that link. It is a full disclosure. It is a an affiliate link, so I do get a commission if you use that link, but it's no extra cost to you. In fact, you get a discount if you use that link. So, but go and look at that and sign up for the Google G Suite applications. And what that will allow you to do is you will need to get a domain name, which is, again, and I'm going to talk about that in the next session about the importance of marketing and having a website. But anyway, if you'll go to when you sign up for that, you'll be given the option to pick a domain name. And again, I'm going to talk about that in the next session a little more. The other thing I'll mention about G Suite is that there's so many tools there and so many applications that you can use for private practice. And it absolutely will help you bootstrap and be able to manage your practice in those early stages for a very minimal cost. And I've got the full course, G Suite for Therapists. If you go over to practiceoftherapy.com/G Suite, you can check that out and find out. It's a 10-lesson course, and it's probably about 6 hours worth of material where I walk you through how to set those different parts of G Suite up, including the Gmail and how you can use that for your business. And, you know, when you're first starting out, when you've got the time to do all of those things, that's the perfect time to invest in doing those kind of bootstrapping kinds of things. So certainly there are other email services out there that you can sign up for. Gmail and G Suite's the one that most people are aware of. So that would be something to consider. Obviously, when you're first starting out, you might want to use just the free Gmail, but you're not going to want to do that for long, just because I think it's just more professional to have your own domain name on the end of your email. Just like when you email me, Gordon@practiceoftherapy.com or LGordonBrewer@kingsportcounseling.com. Those are both Gmail accounts, but they have my own domain, and it just helps, I think, with the appearance and the professionalism in the long run. The other thing that you'll probably want to think about in setting up your office is a fax system. Again, the one that I recommend is SFax. That's the one that I use. And again, I'll put some links to that in the show notes about those services with your setting up your office. I think that's pretty well hits the highlights of setting up an office. So you want to think about your location. You want to think about maybe bootstrapping and maybe sharing a space or subleasing a space in those beginning stages. And I would say look for the free spaces like I did, but check them out and make sure it's going to, a lot of times what you get what you pay for, and free is free. So you don't get a whole lot sometimes with free. Well, folks, I hope this is giving you some ideas and maybe some other ways to think about setting up an office space. And in this third part of Love the Work, Hate the Job series that I'm doing, do take the time to go over and check out the full course on Love the Work, Hate the Job. Again, that's practiceoftherapy.com/Love the Work course. And the discount, you can get that at practiceoftherapy.com/Love the Work discount, and take advantage of that while it's at a good cheap price. I try to one of the things I will mention is that I do charge for some of the courses that I do, and the reason that I do that and the reason that I charge for is I do put the time into it. And a lot of those courses, it'll take me a day or two to put together. So I feel like it's not to feel like I've got to justify anything, but just want to make you aware that it's not just something that I just throw up there. I put some thought into it, and certainly a lot of time in developing these courses that I offer. And I try to keep them priced at a place where people can afford them and that they're not completely outrageous. If you go online and you can see that there are courses that cost thousands of dollars, and to me that's just way over the top, but I do do feel like my time's valuable, and hopefully it's valuable to you as well. So you check those things out. One other thing real quickly before I close here, I did forget to mention just about fax machines and copiers and printers and that sort of thing. And sometimes, depending on the office space that you rent or lease, if you go that route, a lot of times they'll include that, including Wi-Fi and internet. And again, that's another thing to think about. With Wi-Fi and internet, one alternative is just to use your phone as a hotspot. That's probably not going to be a long-term solution, but might be something you could do in the very beginning to just save a little bit of extra cost. Of course, you got to think about your bandwidth and your data usage and all that sort of thing. But again, being able to think outside the box about these things around setting up an office. So that's it for today, folks. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about marketing and what you need to do to get referrals in those initial stages. And hopefully that'll be some good information for you. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. Thanks again, folks, for joining me in this these short series that I'm doing. Although this one's running a little bit longer, I guess I just had more to say about it. But check back in with us tomorrow or whenever you might be listening to this. If you're listening to this in the future or the distant future, there's one more part to this 4-part series on Love the Work, Hate the Job. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. If you haven't already, please sign up to receive the free Private Practice Startup Guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.